In this video, I'll break down how to create this really cool like 3D floating Kodak frame effect in Apple Motion 5. So you can see this is what the final result looks like, and unfortunately you can't create this effect in Final Cut. You're going to have to use Apple Motion, because in Apple Motion you have the ability to move things in 3D space as well as being able to add a 3D camera. I highly encourage you to buy Apple Motion, but I just want to go straight out and just say there is no way to do this in Final Cut. You're going to have to use Apple Motion. The program only costs $50. It's super cheap. It's a really good program. It's super fast. It doesn't slow your computer down. If you have an older computer, don't worry about that. The program still runs perfectly fine. So this video will kind of be like a crash course beginner's guide to kind of like how to use 3D cameras, how to move things in 3D space. So hopefully you enjoy this video. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and just create a new project. And in this project, we are going to create those Kodak frame overlays. So just click on Command N to create a new project, and we'll just call this Kodak frames. You can name whatever you want. The resolution, I would probably say at least to be 1080, or you could do it 4K. Doesn't really matter that much because this is just a photo. We're going to go over to render. You want to make sure it's this Kodak Apple ProRes 4444. Basically, this is basically like the ProRes file. This ProRes file basically has to do with the alpha channel, because we want the background to be transparent. So make sure this is correct, and we'll just click on OK and just create a new project. Now what we're going to do is you're just going to import a couple of photos. Now I won't be recreating the intro completely from scratch because that's going to take a very long time, but I just want to show you the basic way of doing it. Of course, you can take the steps I show you in this video and kind of make it more advanced. You don't necessarily have to do the exact same thing I'm doing. I'm just trying to give you the basic idea of how it works. So let's go ahead and take a Kodak frame slide. I'll just place it on top of the photo, and then we'll use these Kodak frames. Now if you're wondering where these Kodak frames are from, they are from Cinepax. Let's head over here, selecting the photo. We're going to select in this transform tool just so we can see what we're doing. Let's go ahead and just decrease the scale a little bit, and we're also just going to adjust the crop just to make sure it fits inside that overlay. Select on this photo, selecting the transform tool, and we'll go to the scale, just decrease the scale to something like this, and then we're just going to adjust the crop because we want to make sure it completely fits inside that Kodak overlay. So you can see here are the two Kodak overlays. Now you want to make sure there's nothing below these photos. You want to make sure the background is black because we want these photos to have a transparent background. So we'll go ahead and just export them. So make sure you're hovered over the different ones you want. So this one and this one, hover over this one, go over here to the export, go over here to save current frame, and we'll call this Kodak frame 001. And you want to go over here to settings and make sure it says PNG image. So make sure it's a PNG image, because with a .png image it will have a transparent background. So click on save, and there you go. So there's the Kodak frame, the first Kodak frame, and now we're going to repeat that same step to export another one. So let's head over here and let's go make sure we're selected on top of this Kodak frame. Go over to export, click on save current frame, and we'll just call this Kodak frame 002. Make sure on the settings is a .png image, so click on next, and then as you can see, simple as that. Now we just exported these two frames with a PNG background, which just means it's transparent. So we'll just wait for it to render, and I'll go ahead and let's just minus out of Final Cut, or just minus out the program so we actually see our desktop window. Let's just simply minus out of Final Cut. So as you can see, here are the two images. So let's go ahead and select on both of them, so they're .png. Let's double click on them just to make sure they have a transparent background. Here's the first one, here's the second one. That gray background means the image itself is transparent. There we go. Now we just exported those frames as a .png image, so they just have a transparent frame, so it'll just be easy to use. One other thing I want to show you how to do is how to export a certain section out of Final Cut so you can import it into Apple Motion. So instead of like exporting your entire project, maybe you just want to export a certain part of your video and then put it in Apple Motion, make the changes, and then put it back into Final Cut. Well, let's say for example I'm placing a marker down. This is a photo, so it's not a great example. It'd be a better example if it was a video, but let's say I want to just this marker and this marker. I just want to export this section. I don't want to export all of these photos. I just want to export this section. So what you do is click on R, so press on the R key, and then just use your mouse and just select this section. So if this is the section in yellow, click on Command E, and then as you can see, this little icon, we are only exporting this like 2-second section. And then if this was, for example, this is a photo, we would just export as like a PNG image, Or if it's a video, head over here to settings, go over here to video codec, and then I would probably change the video codec to Apple ProRes 422, probably a ProRes 422 file, or like let's say this one. If you're exporting a video and you intend to put it back into Final Cut to export it again, I would use a ProRes file. You only want to use an H.264 codec if you are taking that video that you're just exporting and uploading to social media. But again, if you're intending to put that video or clip or whatever back into Final Cut and then exporting it again, you want to use a Apple ProRes file, because the video itself or the file itself is not going to be really compressed and it's going to be much higher quality. So what you would do is head over here to Apple Motion and then just click on it and then wait for it to load. It can sometimes take, you know, a minute or two to load up Apple Motion, so we're just simply going to wait until Apple Motion is all loaded up. So once you have Apple Motion's project browser open up, we're going to select on Motion Project. Now head over here to preset. In this case, we'll leave it at 4K Ultra HD. You can of course change it to your liking. The frame rate, we're going to change it to 29.97. You want to make sure this frame rate matches the frame rate of your project. So say you're editing a music video and the music video is in 30 frames per second, or your project setting in Final Cut is 30 frames per second, you of course want to select the appropriate frame rate. Unless you're uploading this like directly to Instagram. So let's say like you're trying to make like a 3D album visualizer and you're just going to export this project to Instagram. I would actually encourage you to use 60 frames per second. However, again, if you're putting this 3D like video or 3D project into the music video, you want to make sure that frame rate is appropriate. So it kind of just depends on what you're trying to do. Is this going to be part of the music video, or is this going to just be a separate video just by itself? In this case, we would be putting this into a music video, so we're going to select on 29.97 frames per second, and the duration we will just leave it at 20 seconds. I would probably say anywhere between 10 and 15 seconds. You want to make sure the project is a little bit longer than you actually intend on using, just so there's more space and the timeline isn't like super crunched down. So in this case, 4K Ultra HD, 29.97, because we're going to put this back into like the music video, and the duration we are going to leave it at 20 seconds, and we're just going to click on open, and we'll wait for Apple Motion to load up. Now before we continue on with the project, I'm going to head over here to File. So click on File. I'm going to go over here to Save As, because we're going to save this project to our hard drive. So we'll go ahead and just call this, let's say 3D Kodak frame. Now you can of course save this to a hard drive, or if you don't save this to a hard drive, obviously once you finish the project and close it out, it's of course going to delete it forever. So it's depending on if you're just making this like a one-time project, or maybe you want to come back later and save it. So we're going to go ahead and select on our Samsung T7, go to our YouTube folder where all my projects are, so click on the folder, and then of course you can name it whatever you want. So click on the folder and then just probably collect media. I'm not 100% sure which one you should choose, because I'm not really quite sure what each of them the options does. I would probably turn collect media off, because that was probably going to increase the file size and make it bigger. So we're going to select on YouTube and then click on here to save, and now basically we are going to save this project to our hard drive. So after we close out this project, if you want to make any kind of changes, we can maybe later go back into our hard drive, open up this project, and make the correct changes. So what we're going to do is we're going to just click on Command I to import our media. So in this case, we're going to have the background image, hold down Shift, and we're going to select the Kodak frame 1 and the Kodak frame 2. So here are the media that we're going to be using. As you can see, let's just go ahead and just disable all of these, and kind of just basically what I like to do is I kind of just like to do it one at a time. So I'm just going to enable the Kodak frame, and then what we're going to do is we're going to select on the group, head over here to Object, we're going to head over here to Camera, so select on Camera, and you're going to switch the project to 3D. So there we go. Now the project is in 3D space, so now we can move these overlays in 3D space. So let's head over here, go to select on camera, and then scroll down here, go to active camera, and we're just going to select on top. So now we have a top view. Let's go over here to fit, and we're going to change it to 12%. So let's select on the first Kodak overlay, or the second one, depending how you look at it. Now let's head over here to Inspector, go over here to Properties, and what I like to have is put the Position tab open and the Rotation tab open. So what you want to do is you want to head over here to the Z-axis, and you're basically moving it in 3D space. So as you can see, this red line is like the plane right here, and you want to make sure you're basically thinking of it as like you're kind of like adjusting it in the different planes. So if you head over here to the Z-axis, you're basically moving it kind of in Z space, I guess is a better way of explaining. So let's head over here to Z. As you can see, you see that you'll see this thing move as I adjust the Z space. So you can see now we're moving it in Z space. So we go ahead and just adjust it something like this, Should look pretty cool. Now let's head over here to the X position. We're just gonna move the X. We're just gonna move the position over. Now this is basically where you can just mess with stuff. So let's take the Y rotation, adjust the Y rotation. We want to take the Z rotation and mess with it a little bit. Head over here to scale, and we're adjusting the scale. However, it's still staying on this same plane. So let's head over here to the next one, selecting the Kodak overlay. We're gonna go over here to position, and again we're gonna move this so you can see in that little preview window we are now moving it on a different plane. So now this is on a different plane, so it kind of like obviously makes it look like it's in 3D, or makes it look like in 3D space. So here to the X, we're just gonna move the X position over. We are going to adjust the scale to get like a look that we want, something like this. If we will take the Z and we'll move it a little farther back. Let's take the rotation and just adjust the rotation, the Y and the Z rotation, something like this. Should look pretty cool. And now we adjust the X position, so you can see they are on different planes. So here's like the first plane, the second plane, and then the third plane. And then we're going to go ahead and enable the background layer, so you can see. And if I adjust the scale, as you can see if I scale it up, it's now covering the Polaroid overlays, because it's on, like, I guess I don't know the best way to describe it, but it's on the plane before all of it. So if we increase the scale, it's now going to cover the Polaroid overlays. So again, we're going to head over here to Z, and now we have to move this. As you can see in the preview window, we are now moving it in Z space. So now it is going behind all of these Polaroid of these Kodak overlays. As you can see, there we go, we just moved it in Z space. Now of course you can see some of the black background, so let's head over here to the background. I'm just going to increase the scale until we can't see any of the black background. And as you can see, now of course you can adjust the different angles to get a certain look that you want. Let's head over here to active camera, and then as you can see already this looks a lot better. So what we're going to do is we're going to select on the actual camera itself. We're going to head over here to behaviors. We're going to scroll it down until we find camera, and we're going to select on dolly. Now there's a whole bunch of different ways you can do it. I'm going to show you a couple different methods. So what we're going to do is we're going to go forward, let's say like maybe like 7 seconds. We're going to select on the dolly animation, and we're going to select on O. Basically that's going to create an out point, so that is the duration of the actual dolly animation. So what we're going to do is we're going to select on the dolly. Actually, we'll go to the end of the dolly animation. So go to the end, go over here to dolly, make sure you're selected on the dolly parameter, and we're just going to, as you can see, we are now just going to adjust. As you can see already this looks a lot better. It's kind of moving in 3D space, so we're going to adjust it until that looks good. So we go ahead and play. As you can see already, there we go, we have already created the effect. So if you play right here, now of course you can make it go faster or slower, and as you can see, there we go, there is pretty much kind of already the animation, though a very simplified version of it. Now it's probably going a little too long. Even in the intro that I made, I think the animation probably was going a little bit too long, so sometimes the animation could look a little bit jittery. If the animation ever looks jittery, it's because the animation itself is probably way too long. Even the intro, I think the intro probably was a little bit too long. I probably should have made it go a lot faster. So you'd of course select over here, let's say you want to go this fast, select on the dolly animation, and then click on O, and that would basically like kind of like lengthen or shorten the duration of this dolly animation. Now we're going to select on the dolly animation itself, go over here to speed, and we're going to select on ease out, because we're actually going to play this animation in reverse when I put it in Final Cut. And then as you can see, this is what it looks like. As you can see, it basically gives a little more of that ease animation. So you can see now again, I think the animation probably again is a little bit jittery. That's because it's at 7 seconds, which is probably a little bit too long. But there you go. Just again, I want to show you the basic idea. So you see now, because we moved it in the Z space, it's on because we moved it in Z space, these Kodak frames and the background, they are all on different planes. So as you see, so they're all kind of in like 3D space, so it looks like it's kind of a really cool like trippy illusion. It looks kind of like you're in a 3D environment, but in reality the Kodak overlays are just on different planes. And then of course you could adjust the scale and position. That's basically like the basic idea of 3D. One thing that I made a mistake in when I started out was I didn't understand that these Kodak overlays, or the video, the photos themselves, they have to be on different planes, or else it doesn't look 3D. Now what we're going to do is going to head over to the beginning of the actual animation itself. We're going to select on the camera. We're going to head over here to rotation, so make sure you're selected on the camera, and then go over here to rotation. We're going to add a keyframe on rotation. We're then going to go to the end of the animation, or however, wherever you want to end, and we're going to take the animation, and we're going to type in like negative 16. So we're going to do negative 16. So now as you can see now the dolly animation is happening, but there's also a little bit of rotation, which just adds a little bit of dynamic movement to the actual video. As you can see already, that looks a lot better. So there we go, simple as that. It's just really cool. It's zooming in, which looks really cool, but the more, I feel like the more movement you add to the video, it's going to make it look a lot better. Now again, you can see it's a little bit jittery. There is no motion blur, so that's obviously a huge part of it. It's also a 29.9, so it's also a 29 frames per second project, so it obviously won't be as smooth as, let's say, using a 60 frames per second. So as you can see already, that looks a lot better. Now of course you can select on the actual keyframes themselves. So let's say I want to select on this keyframe, I can right click on it, and of course you can go to interpolation. You could change it to Bezier, and you can basically adjust the keyframes, kind of like basically how you'd use in After Effects, Easy Ease and all that stuff. Or you could also go over here, interpolation, let's change it back to linear. We can select on the animation and let's click on ease both. So let's click on ease both. We can also select on the first keyframe animation, and we can also click on ease both or ease in, ease out. It's completely dependent on what you want to do. It's really cool that Apple Motion has the ability to basically kind of have like a keyframe graph, and of course you just mess with it. I might do like a future video breaking down how to use the keyframe graph, but that's basically like the simplest explanation. You want to make sure this icon is selected, and of course if you're familiar with After Effects or any kind of like keyframe animation graph, it just acts the same. You just mess with it, you ease in, ease out, change it to like Bezier. You can also go over it again, you can select on it, right click, interpolation, you can change it to all these different interpolations and just basically mess with it. In my opinion, I think the best one is probably either change it to Bezier or just the Bezier graph, or just click on ease in and ease out. I feel like in my opinion those are probably the two most used ways of doing it. So you can see, there we go, that looks a lot better. Another little tip, you can also head over here, you can select on the keyframe graph again, go over here and then click on the different types of things you want. So the scale animation, or what is animated, so you can go through and adjust that. And you basically, as you can see, if I have different ones, so I'll go to the beginning, as you can see this is the one because it's yellow. So you can go ahead and you select on this one or select on this one. So you can select on the different parameters you want to have, or basically select on the different ones. So see, we're selected on this one. We can't see the rotation one, so as you can see, if I can select on this one, now we can actually see the keyframe graph. So you basically go through, you can, again, obviously the more keyframes you have, the more of these stuff you're going to have. So you just select on the ones you want to use, and of course you can kind of like pinpoint the specific keyframe you want to use. I might make a more of an in-depth video. The Final Cut Pro has a really good in-depth video that I might link up in the annotated cards to really give an in-depth idea of how to use the keyframe graph. But it's pretty easy. All you get is just simply ease in, ease out, or change to like Bezier. Those should probably work, but again, you can really mess with it to get a really specific look. Those are just a couple little tips and tricks that you should just be aware of when you're using the keyframe graph in Apple Motion. Now another really important part of animation is motion blur. Now you can select on the project, but before we do that, go over here to render, and if I go over here, so select on render, the render tab, go down as you can select on the different things you want. You could of course change the resolution to like half or quarter. If it's kind of like getting a little bit laggy, you might want to turn down the resolution, which is kind of like proxy media for Final Cut. In this case, we're going to enable motion blur, so watch the project. As you can see, there's already there's a little bit of motion blur. So here is before, and then here is after. It might be very subtle, but as you can see, there is a little bit of motion blur. Now once you apply motion blur, once you like add the motion blur, turn the motion blur feature on, the project itself is going to get really laggy. So I'd probably keep it off until the very end. You can also head over here to project, so go over here to project, go over here to properties, and then as you can see, rendering, or actually down here, motion blur, you can adjust the motion blur samples. So let's turn the motion blur sample something like 35. We can just increase it, which is just going to add more motion blur. You can change the shutter angle, just like it's just like how you would in like your Premiere Pro or After Effects. You basically can just adjust the motion blur. So you just basically adjust like how intense or how subtle you really want it to be. It's just dependent on what you want to do. As you can see there's a little bit of motion blur. Here is the before, and then here is after. As you can see there adds a little bit of motion blur. You could like do a whole bunch of different things, but just adding a little bit of motion blur again will make it look a lot better. And of course, the faster the animation is, the more motion blur it's gonna look like. So obviously, if you make the animation really fast, there's gonna be a lot of motion blur. If the animation like this, it's probably a little bit too slow. The motion blur won't be as intense. But I just want to show you how to enable motion blur, how to adjust motion blur. Now the last step you want to do is export your project. So go ahead and make sure you select on your project, click on Command E to export the project, and then go over here to settings. So go over here to settings. I would probably use a ProRes file, so Apple ProRes 422 or like Apple ProRes 444. In this case, probably I would choose either 422 HQ or Apple ProRes 422. I would probably select either one of these codecs. This one should be fine, but if you're finding the quality is not that good, maybe bump it up to like this one. You want to use a ProRes file when you're exporting a video and putting it back into Final Cut if you intend to export the video again. Always use a ProRes file, color space, Rec 709. All this stuff should look good. You can just select the entire project, or you can use play ranges. In this case, probably the entire project. It should be good enough. QuickTime is pretty good. Go over here to rendering, and then of course you can select what you want. Go to render quality, adjust it to like the best, normal, however want you. The normal probably will look good, or like the best, or choose to get to best should probably look good enough. Normal will probably be good enough. Go over to camera, we can select on lighting, shadows, depth of field, or motion blur. We can like basically just, you're basically selecting what you want to be included in your export. In most cases, motion blur, and then just click on next. And I'm not going to do because it's going to probably take like 5 or 6 minutes to export. The project that I did in the intro took about 15 minutes to export, so I'm not going to do that. I don't want to waste your time. So you just click on next, and then just follow the same steps like you would in Final Cut, and that's basically how you would export your project. So let's go ahead and minimize out of Apple Motion, and let's go ahead and close Apple Motion, and we'll of course give you this option. So you can either click on don't save, obviously if you don't save, the project will be erased, or you can just click on save, and now that project will be saved so you can open it later if you want to make any kind of adjustments. So as you can see, if I open up my hard drive, my Samsung T7, go over here to YouTube, as you can see where we saved it, 3D Kodak frame. Here is the Apple Motion project. So just double click and Apple Motion will load up the project. So of course you could again delete the entire project entirely if you don't intend on coming back to it, or if you want to come back to and make any kind of changes, you can simply save it to your hard drive. So we're just going to wait for Apple Motion to load up, and as you can see, there we go, there's the project. So now you can of course make the appropriate changes if you notice anything was a little bit off. Let's say the animation was maybe a little too slow. Again, if the animation looks a little stuttery, it looks a little bit jittery, it's probably because the animation itself is way too long. So of course, adjust it accordingly. Again, if you're using 60 frames per second, a long project should be like a long animation should be fine. But if you're using like a 24 frames per second timeline or a 29 frames per second timeline, I would probably make sure the animation is fast, just so there's none of that weird like jittery animation. So those are just some of my tips. So that's just basically how you would save the project if you want to make any changes in the future. Once it's exported from Apple Motion, you just simply click on like Command I to locate it, and then say like this is it, and then you just click on import selected, just like you would any normal like video you normally would import. So this is the video that I use. As you can see, this is the one that I created for the intro. So you'd of course just locate it in your media tab. Now this is really important. You want to make sure 4K 29.9 frames per second. You want to make sure that frame rate is right. Click on Command N to create a new project, and we'll just call this Kodak frame. We can of course name it whatever we want. Let's say final, something like that. So you just rename it Kodak frame final. You want to make sure the frame rate is 29.97 because that's the frame rate of the actual video. And let's just choose Apple ProRes 422 because we don't need an alpha file, an alpha background. So let's click on OK, and we're going to create a project just like you would normally. And then here is the project, and then of course locate where you have it saved. So let's import the actual project itself, and we're going to set the duration. So I think I had something like 919, something like this. We're going to go ahead and just trim the video, and then as you can see, we'll go ahead and just load the project. This is what it looks like. It already looks a lot better. Now you see this, and you realize when the intro of the video is actually in the opposite direction. It's really easy. Select on the video itself, go over here, and then just click on reverse clip, and simple as that. Now the clip is just playing in reverse. So if we go ahead and play the video, we'll go ahead and load the project. Now the video, as you can see, just simply is playing in reverse. And there you go. It's as simple as that. Now the video is just playing in reverse. So it just depends on what you want your final product to look like. Anyways, that's how you create this really cool like 3D floating Kodak frame effect in Apple Motion 5, and then how you import it back into Final Cut, and then you would just simply export the video like you would any normal video using the Kodak H.264, and then uploading to Instagram, YouTube, obviously wherever you want the video to be. And hopefully you found this video helpful and informative. If you enjoy watching these types of videos, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Also, don't forget to check out my digital store where I have a whole bunch of plugins, presets, and overlays for Final Cut Pro 10. See you in the next one. Peace.